predominantly black colleges and universities and medical school, HBCUs. What are your thoughts?
For medical school?
For medical school.
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah, you can.
So my thoughts on it, Dale, are that, we have to look at them first from a historical perspective. The first African American HBCU medical school was established, at Howard University and at Meharry because of the needs that were seen by people who were philanthropic nature to take care of the health of the freedmen. Okay? By the year 1920, we probably had almost 22 African American focused medical schools in this nation.
Oh, wow.
In fact, in the 1920s and 1930s, there were more black doctors per capita than there are today. Meaning that for 100,000 people, there were more black doctors then than there are today.
Oh, wow.
What happened was the Flexner Report was written, the Flexner, F-L-E-X-N-O-R, N-O-R, and that report led to the closing of all of those medical schools except for two.
Yeah, changed the accreditation process.
Because it changed the accreditation process and put into standardization what the 4-year curriculum of a medical school should look like. And with that, when that came out, what happens is that people stopped funding the schools that didn't have those, that had the appropriate infrastructure, okay? If we go back and look at what has been the purpose of HBCUs, for the most part, the purpose of HBCUs was to educate blacks to perform certain functions. And those functions were teachers, preachers, and engineers, and to be farmers. Okay? Those were the four major subjects that those schools taught people. They weren't being educated to become lawyers. They weren't being educated to become doctors. Because that was a profession that, for lack of a better way of saying it, was thought to be a white profession. Yeah. Okay? But these other professions had their purpose in helping the community as a whole, because these professions could help educate the masses. Okay? So that's why, A&T, A&M, why we have these initials at the end of these schools, because that was their focus. Now what we're beginning to see is that now these schools are beginning to try to evolve. And they want to evolve and become players in the 21st, 22nd century by developing scientists, by developing pre-medical tracks, by developing new disciplines that allow for them to become competitors for the job markets of today. Okay? The HBCU schools that we have now in place with Howard, Meharry, Morehouse, and Charles Drew out in California still serve a very viable purpose. And that is, they have developed their academics such that they can take students that may have lesser scores, that may not be as attractive to some of our majority schools, and bring them in and make them just as successful, just as honored physicians, but yet they didn't have that quote-unquote MCAT score, that quote-unquote GPA. So that's where the role of these schools are. But they also bring in people that have the high GPA and the high MCAT score, because people want to go to that environment as opposed to going into an environment in which they would be a chocolate chip on a cookie. Okay? So when we look at it from that perspective, they're very valuable. I'll just end with this. What we did see this past in 2011, of all the blacks who graduated from medical school, 17% of them graduated from an HBCU. Okay? So that says that the majority of us, almost 80%, are graduating from non-HBCU schools. And then another small percentage, believe it or not, are graduating from offshore medical schools, and in particular, Cuba.
So that's what I want to go to next to offshores, because we get a lot of questions on diverse medicine. But Dr. Armstrong, your thoughts on HBCUs?
Well, I'm the daughter of someone who went to Meharry.
My wife is Mary, so
And
I love
I'm
HBCUs.
the
And all my
niece
family went to them. I was the
I'm
first
the
one
niece.
not to.
of someone who was in the last class of the Leonard Medical School at Shaw. And between my uncle and my father, they took care of people who lived in eastern North Carolina for more than 60 years, out on what we called, they used to call it sharecropping communities, which was the holdover of slavery after emancipation. And they did incredible medicine. And they did because they had limited resources, and they were brilliant in using the limited resources that they had with their understanding of the human body. And so we, the people that they took care of could not use the hospitals in North Carolina. It wasn't until that same group of black doctors fought for the hospitals to open up and desegregate, one of which was Duke and the University of North Carolina. Instead of people that we take for granted being able to come to places like Duke and Carolina and ECU. I was born in a birthing room because we couldn't use the hospital. And there were lots of healthy children who were born because they understood the science in a way that people who had all the resources really took for granted. And so the history of medicine especially in the African American community, includes the contributions that were made from a group of people who didn't complain, but took the resources that they had and made the resources available to a community who basically was disenfranchised when it came to the quality of the care that they got. And so I think Howard Meharry, Morehouse, and Charles Drew are shining examples of that fire in the belly to make sure that a group of people who still are disenfranchised when it comes to health care have access to people who look like them, who understand how they feel, who can be their champions, can be their voices, and therefore there will always be a role for the historical black colleges of medicine in this country, as far as I'm concerned.
And actually, if I may, we're actually looking at trying to even increase that number. I don't know if you knew that at the state level, this state, we had talked about trying to develop possibly another medical school at one of our HBCUs here. In particular, A&T was looked at. And then in another instance, there is actually possibly not appropriations, but there's an application in process right now for Tuskegee to actually become another medical school. So yes, there will always be that need, because there will always be a place for folks that need to go, someplace where folks look like you, and have that ability to have that choice. And that's really key, is to be able to have that choice.
I think, when I talk to the students on diverse medicine, I think it's amazing. A lot of those students don't even know about HBCUs. So I don't know what it is that the word doesn't get out, or why the students don't know about it. And I think you all hit on something that's really beautiful. And the president of Meharry, Dr. Wayne Riley, I used to go to my wife's classes and listen to him talk sometimes. He made that point that you just made a little bit ago about, we come into Meharry, the GPAs might not be as high, MCAT scores might not be as high, but you walk out that door, a medical doctor, and that medical degree is worth the same as everybody else's medical degree across the nation.
That's correct.
Well, the question I always ask people is, how many of us who practice medicine have you had someone say, where did you go to medical school? Nobody cares where I went to medical school. They care that I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody has said that I know that I'm doing and what I'm doing. And whether or not over the long haul, I deliver to them scientifically correct medicine, delivered with compassion and understanding. And as long as I do that, nobody cares. They don't look, there's no diploma on the wall in the clinic that says she went to medical school. And it doesn't say on my name tag where I went to medical school.
Just says MD.
It just says MD.
So all the viewers, historically black colleges and universities, great med schools, apply to them.
That's
Great.
right.
That's right.
Now let's move to the offshore, because this is something that this is a whole different beast in itself. I have cousins on offshore med schools, so I think you're fine. But what I'm hearing a lot from the pre-meds who are going through the application process right now is that they're scared to apply to offshore medical schools because I don't know if this is true or not, or if it's just a rumor that a lot of the offshore students are having difficulty getting back in the States now because there's less residency spots.
Well, there's some truth to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth.
Last year, there were over 1,000 people who went in the match that didn't have a job.
Oh, wow.
It used to be thought, well, medicine is safe.
So the match, what Dr. Armstrong was referring to is after
the lottery.
Yeah, pretty much the lottery. So at the end of med school, you apply for your job essentially, and so that's the match process. So 1,000 people who applied to become doctors didn't get.
No, they applied to continue their training. They graduated from medical school.
Okay, correct.
But so they graduated from med school, and in the old days, it was always accepted that there were always going to be more slots for residency training than there are people graduating. It's the opposite now.
Oh, wow.
Thanks to Medicare cutting back on the funded slots for training, what has happened is that there are fewer slots than there are people who are graduating from medical school, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Right, and the reason why it's going to get worse is because the AANC has mandated that medical schools must increase their size.
That's right.
By 30%.
Without increasing residency spots.
But we're not increasing the residency spot. In fact, the last time that the residency slots numbers were looked at was 1997.
Oh, wow.
So basically, now this year there was a bill that was introduced into the Senate and to the House to try to increase, once again, to re-examine graduate medical education, GME, and the slots that we have for residency programs. But as of yet, it has not passed. It has not come out of committee, so we don't know what's going to be the end all of that. But what has happened is not only is it that the Americans are increasing the medical schools, but the foreign medical graduates are really wanting to come to the United States. In fact, it's been in the last 10 to 15 years that the preponderance of primary care jobs in the United States are being filled by foreign medical graduates. So there is a purpose that they serve. Now, there are Americans who go offshore to go to school, who come back and do a residency program. The difficulty there is dependent upon how you score on your STEP exam. If you score well on step 1 and step 2, you don't have a problem finding a residency program. But if you don't score well, then you're going to have problems finding a residency program. And that's really how they weed our offshore candidates out. In fact, some schools even gain it offshore by allowing the students to have a year off to study for just the boards. And therefore, they score very well on step 1 or score very well on step 2, and therefore they become extremely attractive for folks to bring in. And they bring them over here, and they find that the number that they score does not correlate to their ability to provide culturally competent and compassionate clinical care.
So that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah, I had no idea that was the case.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. This year, the number of folks who did not come out of the match with a job was over 1,000.
And a lot of those are offshore.
Not a lot, but
Not a
a
lot.
good
There
number.
were 538 American graduates who did not match. And then you have the ones that were offshore to add to it.
So a student comes to me on diverse medicine and says, my GPAs, MCATs, my applications, I'm not sure I'm going to get into all these schools, and I'm telling them to broaden their, to apply to at least 15 schools.
Mm-hmm.
The real question here is, the tough question is, apply to offshore schools or no? Apply to offshore schools, no, you're going to have to take out loans, get in debt.
But you're going to take out loans and be in debt anyway going to med school.
Yeah.
So the real question here, I think that the legitimate question is, do I take a chance that I'm going to go to a school that at the end of the 4 years, the chances of me being able to get into a program to continue my training is going to be less. Right now, I think it's about 50-50. And the numbers support that.
Right.
So if you look at the numbers, you're competing first with students who are in American schools. If you look at what is happening with international students who go to medical school in private medical schools where we can take them, the state medical schools can't. They are having trouble, finding a place afterwards. So you have to seriously think about that. Instead, one of the things that you would do is to look or sit with someone who can look at your credentials and say, this is where you need to shore things up. And, do that. If you are a student who is coming from a community where we know there is underrepresentation, then one of the things that you want to do is to put yourself in a position to be competitive. And so, and it's one of the things that I want to get to because there are lots of myths still out there. The first myth is I got to go to medical school as soon as I finish college. No. In fact, we would prefer that you not come to medical school as soon as you finish undergraduate school.
Why is that?
Because most people have grown up. Yeah. For them, the most important thing in their lives was the next test. When you're out, you got to pay bills. You got to attend to schedules. You got some other things to do. And so if I'm a patient, I want somebody who has an understanding of the impact of illness on my life. My dignity is determined by the control I have of my life. Here's somebody, 21 years old, never paid any of their bills, don't understand that if I don't pay my house note, I'm going to be put out. And the reason is their parents paid it. So I wish that medical school would follow the path that business school has, is that they don't want you to even apply until you have worked for a while. So you know the larger context in which you are jumping.
On that point, well, what is the average age of entering medical school now?
At Duke, it's 24 years old.
So that's 2 years out.
That's 3 years out.
3 years out from undergrad.
That's right.
And we're probably about that same number. But not all because of the fact that folks actually took the time off, but more because a third of the folks that we actually admit are re-apps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other myth is, if you don't get into medical school to succeed, stop.
That is a huge myth.
You guys are all that together.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are still stuck in the mode of MCATs and GPAs only. Mm-hmm. We don't look at everything. There are almost 20 things that we look at when the applications get to the table. Mm-hmm. And we want people who have had a life experience, who have, had to do something that they didn't think they would have to do. I'll give you a good example. one of the best students that I recruited to this medical school was the first person who got his application completed and submitted to us. He did it from Afghanistan. He was in his third tour, and he wrote the most compelling essay that I have ever read. They were the kind of things that make you sit back and understand that he knows what's important. You know, it's not about the frivolous things that many of us do. He knew what was important. He was a medic. He understood the notion of leadership. And that's another thing, is that maturity helps you with that, because when you put MD behind your name, whether you want to or not, you're an acknowledged leader.
Yes.
And one of my students said, failure to take on the mantle of leadership that comes with the alphabets is sin. It's sin.
And it's true.
And it's true. So how do you get that? You don't get that by following some checklist that a pre-med advisor gave you so that you could get to medical school. You go somewhere where you haven't been. You grow yourself up. And then, you know, the students who do really well in the medical school application process are the ones who've done Teach for America.
Yes.
The ones who've done the Peace Corps.
Exactly.
The ones who have taken on something that their parents didn't tell them to do. They did it because they felt that they were underprepared for being an adult. So if you feel that you are underprepared for being an adult, then go out and figure out how to be an adult, and then come talk to us.
Right.
And it is a sea change that is happening in the culture of medical schools. You can see it, and fortunately, I've done this long enough that some of us who went out early and everybody thought we were crazy, nobody is calling us crazy now. Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people that we are putting out are those people who are going to be ready to take over the reins of medicine when we want to step back.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you learn that is not in a classroom. You just can't. And so students need to understand that that is as valuable a piece of the application as your transcript.
Right. Another thing that I think students need to understand is, you know, a lot of us kind of have this 1980s, 1990s sitcom mentality.
Yeah.
That, you know, 30 minutes and everything is resolved. And the honest truth in life is it just doesn't happen that way. You know, and one of the things that I see are students who are pressing to be leaders who have never been followers.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we also look for are Indians.
Yeah.
People who have learned how to follow before they decide they want to be a chief.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, I think that's another aspect of your application that you could talk about in your personal statement or as part of one of your experiences. I thought that was very insightful, what you said, Dr. Armstrong, when you said that, you know, we don't want to know just exactly something that happened to you in your life, but how did that impact you? How did it make you feel? When I look at personal statements, I really look to see, you know, that they tell me something about themselves, more so than my mother got sick. My mother got sick, and I didn't like the way that the doctor treated her, and therefore I decided I want to be a doctor. But what you're not telling me is that how did that make you feel about yourself? How did it make your mother feel about her illness? How did it make you feel about your mother's illness? You know, those type of ability to examine is what we're looking for, because that's the person that's asking an uncomfortable question. Not just a superficial question that says, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. Yeah, well, you can help people at McDonald's.
That's right.
You know, but medicine is a whole different animal because you have life and death in your hands. You know, and you have to be mature enough to be able to handle life and death. I've seen residents that I worked with who could not handle that, and they in the hour that their knowledge was needed, it failed them because they were not at the point where they were able to take in a situation, be able to triage it, stay calm, and do what you have to do. And that's another aspect of medicine that we need to get to, you know. But I tell you what, please, if you apply to, let's get back to what we said was that myth number 2. If you don't get it the first time, apply again.
That's right.
Apply again.
As much as 50% of some applicant populations are re-applicants.
Exactly.
There are people who didn't get in at first. And most of the time, the gap between the first application and the second application is more than 2 years. And do not ever put the same application in twice.
Right.
That's a mistake.
You guys tell?
Yes,
Oh yeah, because AMCAS keeps everything.
that's right.
So I
We
can go
archive
back
it.
and look at your application from 4 years ago and compare it.
That's right.
So, you know, really, and then the other aspect of it is most schools, if you don't get in, will allow you to come, if you've gotten an interview and didn't get in, they will allow you to come by and get feedback about why you didn't get in and what you can do to improve your candidacy the next time. Take advantage of that. Please take advantage of that. But the other aspect of it is don't take advantage of it and then not do it.
That's right.
And then apply again.
And put the same thing on
Put the same thing on the application. That's almost like the sure way to maybe get a no is not to ask. You just decided not to ask in a passive aggressive way.
Let me ask this question so we can maybe put the whole MCAT GPA numbers thing to bed. Myth, or so true or false? Med schools have thresholds that you need to reach for your MCAT and GPAs to be even considered.
Some schools do. But they're not going to tell you that. But some schools do. Some schools, they'll see a number and they won't even move you to a secondary. They will screen what comes through in AMCAS, and then they'll decide if they're going to send you a secondary application. And so it varies from school to school.
So, question, does Duke do it?
No, we send a secondary application to everybody who puts our name on their AMCAS wish list. Everybody. So we get 5,000 applications. We send 5,000 invitations to complete our secondary application. Difference is that we show you what we're going to ask you, and then you decide whether or not you want to take on our secondary application. And it's known in the country that it is not an easy application. And it's meant intentionally not to be so, because the people that we talk to when we ask the question, who should come to medical school, told us what to ask. And so we ask. And then the people who read our applications are not just faculty. They're some of those same folks. And the people who then interview, we do MMI, what Dr. Bright was telling you, we do MMI.
The speed dating.
The speed dating, yeah. Oh, yeah. So you don't know when you walk into a room where you're talking to a doctor, a nurse, a patient advocate, a community activist. You don't know. They just have a name tag with the name on it. And they're going to ask you to tell them what you think of what you read. We have if you don't know how to work with other people, that's what work really helps.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you don't know how to work on a team, then when you come through our application process, when you interview, you're going to be put in a room with another person that you just met that day, and you got 5 minutes to do something together. So,
wow, I like that.
5 minutes
I like
to
that.
do something together. And then somebody's going to ask you in one of those rooms, since they don't see the application, nobody in the interview process who's interviewing, who's doing it or not, sees the student's application. They just figured we were smart enough to ask the right people to come. So somebody's going to be in a room and say to you, you got 10 minutes to tell me the most important things about yourself that I should know to make a decision about whether you should come to medical school. Just think about it. the most important thing, how can you be humble about that? And then at some point, you got to sit down and there'll be a prompt, and you got to write for 10 minutes about that prompt. And they're hard questions. They really are. And so we have tried to make the process fair. Fair to the people who want to go to medical school, but even fairer to the people that are going to have to put up with these folks. Yeah. It is in my own mind, and it's interesting because I talk to people about this all the time. The disconnect in medicine, the place that the workforce has helped disparities, is that we have trained a group of dysfunctional workers who drive people away from the kind of medicine that would be thought of as preventive medicine. We have been so arrogant that we have not gotten down in the trenches with the folks who have to live this stuff every day and try to figure out a way to make it so that they can do it, to live their, what their experience is, so that we don't give them plans that they can't do because we were stupid enough to think that everybody's like me. So how do I find a person like that? I find a person like that because they have gone and lived it before they come to medical school.
Right.
And then what I need to do in the process is to have some of those same folks deciding who is going to come to medical school.
Right.
And if I can do that, then maybe some of the production of disparities, which occurs because of the misuse of emergency medicine for regular medicine, because we have ostracized them in the place where we could have made them better. If we can then take that piece away and move that group of people who drive the cost of healthcare way up back into the layer where we can do the right kind of medicine, then over time we'll cut those costs. Right. Because we will then do preventive medicine. Preventive medicine is done in the clinic when the patient sees you first. Right. Preventive medicine occurs because they are not afraid of you in the white coat. Mm-hmm. And in our community, having grown up watching it all my life, having experienced it as my dad went out to do house calls in the country, they were afraid. They didn't want to see a white doctor. They did not trust white doctors. Didn't. Not at all. But on Saturdays, when they had a day off, our patients, my dad's patients, would come in droves, would wait to see him for hours. Mm-hmm. And my dad would go in at 7 o'clock and he would come home at 10. Mm-hmm. He would see everybody and treat everybody with respect. And not
on a clock.
It wasn't on
20 minutes, hope you gotta go.
No.
Not like that.
And if they could not pay, it was okay, because his feeling was that healthcare was a birthright, just as much a birthright as the right to education. Right. So those are the people that we need to look for in this admissions process. And thank God the LCME has finally given us the ability to look beyond GPAs and MCAT schools, to look for those folks who have those sensibilities, to guarantee people that they can still do the science, but whether they do the science at 4.0 versus 3.0, there is not a shred of evidence that says that somebody who's got a 3.0 can't be a good doctor, right, can't be a great researcher. Not a shred of evidence. And one of the things that it has taken us 15 years to do here is to prove that one of the most brilliant people that we have had come out of this medical school walked into it with a 23. And this year made the highest score on the certifying exam for neurosurgery. He missed one question and scored in the 99th percentile on every standardized test.
23 on the MCAT.
23 on the MCAT. Neurosurgery.
Highest score.
Highest score.
And
Morehouse.
Morehouse.
Whew.
Bad brother. Bad brother.
And so